Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Uplift. Can you really be pro-life and a feminist? Joining us today is author of Abolition Women, Fiorella Nash, where she will discuss authentic feminism. Welcome Fiorella to the show. Thank you for joining us today. Can you just share some insight on what is a pro-life feminist?
Well, I think like many members of my generation, there was always a feeling that being pro-life and a feminist was the ultimate contradiction in terms. That the idea of being a pro-life feminist was a nonsense, and it was not even something any of us considered. You either identified as feminist or as pro-life. And for someone like me, I rejected feminism quite early. I regarded it as outdated and rather self-pitying and quite aggressive. It seemed to me that the feminists I was growing up with were fighting yesterday's battles. And I could never reconcile the death of the innocent, the killing of the innocent, with any kind of human rights movement. It seemed to me that that was the contradiction in terms. However, as a result of my pro-life campaigning, I worked for many years for SPUC. I came to realize that, in fact, there is a need for feminism. We do not have equality in the truest sense of the word. There are many areas in which women still struggle. We have the sexualization of girls, we have intimate partner violence, sex abuse. While these things are happening, while a woman can be raped and murdered on her way home at night, we do not have true equality. So there was a need for authentic feminism to really tackle those many issues. But I also came across the work of the early feminists. And I'd written a rather angry article in the papers, which I later regretted, about why feminism was a load of rubbish. And someone sent me, a woman called Anne Farmer, sent me a book called Swimming Against the Tide. And she just stuck a post-it note on the front saying, pro-life feminism does exist. And it opened my eyes to the fact that the early feminists were not in favor of abortion. They saw abortion as a form of exploitation, and that real feminism, authentic feminism, is inherently pro-life. And that was my starting point.
Great. There seems to be a variety of opinions on what feminism is. Firstly, could you share with us your insight on how you define feminism?
Well, the term feminism, it's bandied about quite a bit, but in fact, it's a very, very broad church, if I may use that term. There's radical feminism, there's Marxist feminism. I mean, it's a very, very broad movement, and there are many, many different threads. What most people understand by feminism is, in fact, radical feminism, and it was the radical feminism of the 1960s, which adopted abortion as a woman's right, when beforehand that had not been the case. Abortion was not accepted as a woman's right at all. It was not even accepted as a good thing for women. So that's what most people understand by feminism. The feminism I am really promoting, pro-life feminism, or fourth wave feminism as it's sometimes called, is a form of feminism that seeks to return to the early days of feminism, the world in which feminism was first born, because we have to understand that to really understand where feminism comes from at all, and to embrace a form of feminism that respects the dignity of women, the sanctity of life, and perhaps most importantly, the complementarity of the sexes, the fact that men and women should be fighting together for equality for women, for the common good.
Exactly. And what would you say to those who say, well, you can't be pro-life and a feminist, because it's clearly the rhetoric that we see in the media a lot. What would you say to them?
We have to look at what the early feminists said, that abortion is a sign of exploitation. We've got to stop looking at abortion through the current narrative, and we've got to start looking again at what abortion actually involves. The early feminists talked about abortion as a sign that society is failing women, not helping women. If a woman has to take the life of her unborn child, it shows that she has been greatly wronged. We have to look at the ways in which abortion is being weaponized against women, because one of the worst aspects of the complete sacramentalization, if you like, of abortion, because it's treated almost like a matter of dogma, it's treated almost like a sacrament within radical feminism, is that we have stopped looking at the ways in which abortion is hurting women. And the early feminists recognized that abortion hurt women. We have to recognize that too.
Brilliant. And so the US Supreme Court, has announced its decision to overturn Roe versus Wade on Friday. But people are saying now this decision is regressive and taking women's rights backwards. What is your reaction towards the Supreme Court's ruling on Friday, and how do you respond to concerns that this is a regressive move for women's rights?
I think, first of all, the dust has to settle. I think at the moment, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of hysteria, there's a lot of misinformation going about what Roe v. Wade actually means, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, but also about the status of women and how this is going to affect or not affect the status of women. I think the first thing I would say is we need to look at what Roe v. Wade actually stated. Many people, including pro-abortion judges at the time, regarded Roe v. Wade as a very poor judgment in terms of the way it was worded, in terms of the way it interpreted the Constitution. So that's one aspect of the conversation we have to have. But also, I think we need to reach out to women now. A lot of pro-life groups are obviously celebrating, but are starting to acknowledge that the fight begins now. In some ways, to quote Churchill, it's not the end, it's not the beginning of the end, perhaps it's the end of the beginning, maybe it's the end of the beginning. The real pro-life campaign begins now, and the first thing we need to be doing is reaching out to women. We need to reassure women this is not going to cause the widespread deaths of women. This is not going to mean that women are badly treated during pregnancy. This is not about making women second or third class citizens. This is about justice for all, and all women should be behind that.
So data published recently shows that there's an increase in sex-selective abortions, for example, showing that unborn females are being weeded out in the world. Why do you think pro-abortion feminists and the modern women movement seem to be ignoring these issues and refuse to address them?
Well, I think it harks back to what I was saying earlier about the almost sacramentalization of abortion, that it's become a matter of dogma within feminism, that abortion is a positive thing, and therefore it can only ever be shown in a positive light. And one of the worst aspects of this is that the many ways in which women are suffering as a result of abortion are either being ignored or actively colluded with. What appalls me, it's not just that feminists are ignoring sex-selective abortion. In many cases, they are actually justifying it. Yeah. It's better that a woman has a sex-selective abortion than that her husband beats her into a miscarriage. It's better to have a sex-selective abortion and bring a girl into the world where she will not be properly treated. This is an outrage. It has got to be the worst case of exploitation and discrimination against women there is, not to allow a baby girl to be born. Yeah. And feminism is colluding with it and loses a lot of credibility in doing so. I mean, I should say also that where feminist groups are doing good in this area, they are drawing attention to some of the underlying causes, such as son preference in some cultures. And this is all true, that in cultures where it is much harder, it's much more expensive to bring a girl into the world, where a family need a son to pass on the family name, to inherit, to look after them in their old age. Sure, these are issues that do need to be taken very seriously, but you can't ignore that abortion is fueling this crisis.
Okay. And do you think that there'll ever be room for, pro-life feminists and the modern women's movement to work together to create, a life-affirming culture?
Well, I think we're part of the modern women's movement, of course, but I'm willing to work with people. It's whether the other side are prepared to reach out. When I have in the past organised protests, for example, about sex-selective abortion or, say, China's one-child policy, I have found that people who would not necessarily be in sympathy with other aspects of the pro-life movement are sometimes prepared to at least acknowledge the importance of the issue. I do think, though, that there is much more of a need for the different groups to come together, because this is common ground and this is where we could really come together. But there needs to be a certain humility. There needs to be a willingness to engage.
Exactly, humility, that's correct. And despite many identifying, as a pro-life feminist, there still doesn't seem to be space for people to learn more about this. Do you have any recommendations for people like our viewers to go find and learn more about the pro-life feminist movement?
Well, without wishing to be pretentious, you could read my book. I wrote The Abolition of Woman really as a way of trying to consolidate the years of research I'd conducted into this field. It started off really going around universities, giving talks and getting feedback. So quite a lot of blood, sweat, toil and tears went into the book. But besides that, there are other authors such as Sue Ellen Browder, who wrote the book Subverted, which gives a very good look at, from an eyewitness account of what was going on in the States in the 50s and 60s. She was a former Cosmo girl, so she had a really good view of what was happening. There are also groups like Feminists for Life of America, which have a huge database of information about the history behind the early feminist movement. So there's a lot of information out there, and I would really encourage people to embrace pro-life feminism, to learn more about it.
Great, thank you. And so for those who identify as pro-life feminists, but often maybe feel rejected or silenced, in the culture nowadays, what advice would you give them to prevail, I guess, in the current culture?
Don't be intimidated. You have a voice and you have a duty to use it. Years ago, I took part in a debate with someone from the Women's Equality Party who refused to allow me to speak for pretty much the entire debate. Now, the slogan of the Women's Equality Party at the time was, "We want to listen to all women." That means women you don't like very much. So make sure you are listened to. Do not take no for an answer. You stand in a great tradition of pro-life feminism. This is the authentic feminism. You cannot fight the hierarchy, the patriarchal hierarchy, if you establish a brutal hierarchy of your own. And that is what abortion does. It pits the strong against the weak. That is exactly what feminism was founded to fight. So I would say very much to women, I got so many women coming up to me after talks saying that they really related to the idea of pro-life feminism. That's great. There's a connection there. Now you have to go out there. More and more pro-life groups are taking pro-life feminism seriously. It's just a question of refusing to be ignored. There was a wonderful case some years ago. There was a March for Women's Lives. A pro-life feminist group applied to join. They were rejected, so they turned up anyway, right at the front. They unrolled their banners right at the front of the march. That is what we need to be doing.
Yeah, courage. Very, very courageous. Great. Thanks, Fiorella, for joining us in the studio today. It was a pleasure having you. And thanks for all the work you do for supporting women and the unborn as well. So yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Join us next time where we'll be interviewing more pro-life guests from around the world.